Hello and welcome once again to episode 52 of Code Completion, a special midweek bonus episode. My name is Dimitri, and I am joined today by my fellow completionists, Ben.
Hey.
And Fernando.
Hello.
So today we are recording right on the heels of Apple's Unleashed event, and boy was it unleashed. Let's get the minor stuff out of the way. So we have Apple Music for $4.99 with Siri only.
Who wants this product? Is this a product that anyone asked for or is going to buy? Because I was extremely perplexed by this announcement.
I think it's so that way they can get people who just buy HomePods to kind of use the one thing that Siri is minorly good at.
Fair.
With it.
Minorly.
Apple Music is like $10, and UI
Right.
now costs an extra $5. So
Right. All right.
that's a thing.
Sure. I'll buy it.
I totally missed the first 15 minutes of the event. So when people started saying Apple Music with Siri, I was like, I don't get it. And even after they explained it, I was like, okay, I still don't get it. So a weird curveball from Apple.
Yeah.
So yeah, now you know. UI costs an extra $5 if you want the cheapest
Right.
Apple Music thing. And I guess the HomePod comes in new colors. The HomePod Mini, I should clarify.
Yeah, it was a blue, yellow, and orange, I think, in addition to gray and white.
Yep.
But I just bought 15 of these.
Well, now you need different colored ones.
I didn't know. Okay.
See what you did,
Okay, that's
Fernando?
fine.
Thanks to you, now we have colors.
I'm disappointed
Yeah.
they didn't do a product red. I would have been all over that, but oh well.
These are okay. I hadn't seen them. They're okay.
I'm happy Apple's doing again with more colors.
Yeah.
Agreed.
That's what I'm happy about.
Yep.
It doesn't extend to the MacBook Pros, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah. Those only come in two colors. Come
Right.
on, Ben. They're
Boring and even more boring.
Yeah. And then we also have new AirPods with MagSafe, and I think they have surround sound. I wasn't paying too much attention. This was my early bathroom break of the
Spatial audio, I think, is
spatial
what
audio. Sorry.
Apple calls it. Yeah, so they're basically they are the AirPod Pros as far as their general look. If you compare the actual thing that goes in your ear with the AirPod Pro, they look very similar, except that they don't have the little silicone ear cup thing. It's just a solid piece of plastic, just like the old AirPods. But they are the little stock thing is shorter. They have a little Force Touch sensor in them, just like the Pros, and they have the same spatial audio. Interestingly, they don't appear to have the same case. You pointed that out, Dimitri, that we were all kind of like, oh, I wonder if
It's
they're
in
going to...
between, right?
Yeah, if they're going to do the same Pro case. And it's not as tall as the old AirPods case, but also not as wide as the AirPod Pro case. So,
And they're also keeping the old AirPods.
yes.
Yep.
Well, the second gen AirPods. So that's
Second
actually...
gen.
They did rev them slightly. I think the only thing they changed was
The
they
case.
made it the wireless charging case. But yeah, the second gen is $129, I think. These are $179, and then are the Pros still $249, or did they drop them in price?
$249.
Okay, yeah, so $249. And then if you want to go crazy and get the Max, they're $549 or something. So yeah, cool, interesting. I really like my Pros with the silicone tips. I think that really makes the difference for me between not only from the noise cancellation point of view, but also just literally having them stay in my ears. So I don't think that I would go back to the regular AirPods again. But cool that they're continuing to rev them, and for people that do like them, I think it's a great deal.
I still have the first gen in the second gen case, and they're fine.
Yeah.
I use them so rarely now that I'm permanently at home.
Right.
I was going to say the same thing. I personally think I prefer the AirPods to the Pros. Because I just love the simplicity of it. Because the tips is you gotta fiddle with it until it's airtight and whatever. But I could see the value in the Pros if I were traveling. So
Yeah, airplanes they're good for airplanes and also mowing the lawn. I use mine mostly when I'm
nice.
doing yard
That's a good
work.
idea.
And we have an electric lawnmower, so it's not as loud as a gas powered one, but even still, it's pretty loud. So, but having I can comfortably listen to a spoken word podcast with the Pros at medium volume while the lawnmower is running. So I feel like that's a win in the noise cancellation space.
agreed. Yep.
Yep. And then as far as other things that were announced, there was no Mac Mini, no iMac, no Mac Pro, none of those things. There was a single device that was announced, and that is the MacBook Pro. And it comes with all sorts of new ports that are old. But
Yeah,
new again.
all the new old ports. My favorite one for me is definitely MagSafe. I certainly missed it when it went away. I had a 2016 MacBook Pro before. I have an iMac now, but I had a 2016 MacBook Pro after having a couple of MagSafe MacBook Pros. And man, while the dual-sided charging, being able to charge on either side, right, with USB-C is handy, I really missed the just simplicity of the magnetic charger of MagSafe. So it's very interesting so we were like, how is that going to work, right? If they bring that back, are they going to do some kind of weird, like, split apart USB-C thingy or something? But no, they just gave us a straight up MagSafe port on the side of the computer with a MagSafe cable. And then I believe, unless I heard it wrong, I believe they're also allowing the Thunderbolt 4 ports to allow charging, so you can do really either one.
Ooh.
Which is interesting. So you kind of
they were sure to include on both sides too. So.
right. So you get to keep
Finally.
that kind of both side thing for the USB-C charging, but if you kind of for your main charging you want to use or like around the house, use the MagSafe, and that way it protects it against kids and dogs or just if you're clumsy like me and you just tend to trip over things. It helps protect your computer, which I think is great.
And a benefit is if you have a fancy monitor, it will charge your
Right.
your computer at the same time with one cable, which is like the ultimate dream that Apple tried with the little octopus arms that kind of sprinkle out into many things, but it was still like one cable that went to the computer. That is finally a dream come true on Apple's side.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and a 140 watt charger if you get if you get the Max, right?
The 16. Yep.
Yeah, the 16 with the Max
Yeah.
chip. So
you can order it for configuration on the 14.2, I think.
Okay.
And if you go with the higher chip spec, it comes automatically. And that's a fast charger, which is, I think, a first. They said like you can get 50% in like 30 minutes.
Yep.
Nice.
Yep.
That's
so
awesome.
to me, MagSafe is Apple design at its best.
Yes.
It's Apple offering something that's clearly superior to everyone else and doing it because they can. So
Yes.
MagSafe is so good. I'm extremely happy. My wife was fuming because she was like, I just got the MacBook Air, the M1, and I was like, love MagSafe, and now, so this is great. It's a great thing to have
Yeah.
back.
So what else did they bring back, Dimitri? What other ports did we get in addition to MagSafe?
So we also have this thing called HDMI. Apparently,
What?
you use it to connect to like a projector or a conference room TV. I don't know. That's
Is
something
that like a big Thunderbolt?
Is that still a thing?
It's a big Thunderbolt, yeah, and it's
Our
you can't get in like both sides. You have to like aim it. This is
Are
really
conference
old.
rooms still like a thing that people go to? All right.
Yeah,
Sure.
Joking aside, so the HDMI has come back to the Mac, which it's always been on the Mac Minis, and I think the Mac Pro may have had it like standard. But for the laptops, it has been absent, and that's because the laptops were like way too thin for HDMI, so they claimed. Now they just made the laptop chunkier, and that's now there's not enough room.
Yeah,
so
can we comment quickly before we jump into anything else about like how thick this MacBook Pro looks? Like it is. As soon as they did that sort of that hero like spinny animation thing that they always do when they first show off the shape of the new device, they spun that thing around and I was like, wow, that is. We're back in the days of like the computer feeling like a brick on your lap. I mean, I don't have any problem with that. We're getting better battery life. We're getting faster. We're getting better cooling, more ports. Like it's all. I think those are all very valuable valid trade offs. But especially like with the feet, like the very prominent feet on the bottom, and it's
You
looking
can pay extra
thick.
to get wheels.
They're only $4.99 though.
Oh, that's quite a steal. Who wouldn't do that?
Little casters, so you can get them on Amazon and improve the airflow.
Oh man.
The question for me is like, And there's no answer, so this is just like banter. But how much of this is like the IVE influence? Like where it's starting to wane and we go back to like more ports like it should be, thicker laptops like it should be.
I don't think it's fair to blame one person for this.
It's true.
It's Apple. It's Apple. If there's one company where you can blame one person for like the design of something, it's Apple.
I mean, and I'm sure Johnny Ive had, he had an enormous influence over the industrial design of all Apple products for a very long time.
Yep.
And I said in our chat when we were live chatting this earlier, when we were watching this, that like, is this the first example of, does this showcase the fact that the sort of Ive influence is completely gone from the laptop line, right? Like every speck of the influence that he did have seems to have been drained out of this laptop.
Yep.
If only because, again, it's probably unfair to blame one person, but let's just do it because why not?
Because it's my podcast.
Yeah, right. And you're right that like if there is a place where that is possible, it seems like that place would be Apple. But like if we go on the list of all the things that they got rid of and or put back, it seems like it's a complete role reversal of everything that they did in 2016 compared to the laptops that came before it.
Yep.
And what was happening in the mid 2010s, like there was significant, and I would say unbridled involvement of Johnny Ive's sort of aesthetic. And I do feel like, this has been said to death before, but like I do feel like it seems like in the days of Steve Jobs, he and Ive together created a duo that was really interesting, and there was maybe some push and pull there, right? Whereas, unfortunately, with Steve being gone, there really, from the design side, there really wasn't anybody probably that would tell him no. And so he may have gone a little to the extreme of the sort of simplicity, right? Like his idea, he always talked about in those white rooms, right? The idea of like boiling it down to its essence of like one single brick of aluminum that doesn't do anything. Like it's
aluminum.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just like, yes, aluminum. It's just basically a single sort of surfaceless, buttonless brick of beautiful simplicity, which is cool, but also not necessarily that functional. And it seems like just from an aesthetic point of view, I don't think that in the days of like thinner, lighter, we would have gotten this laptop because it's definitely thicker, heavier, chunkier. I don't know if I would say uglier, but when I like my very first 2 seconds of experiencing what it looked like in the little render that they did, I was like, is this an uglier laptop than the one that it replaced? I think maybe a little bit, like just a little bit, but and I even saw some people on Twitter who were like, "Oh, it's ugly. I'm not buying one." Which, fair. Pick any reason you want to buy or not buy anything.
Right.
That's not going to be how I'm going to decide that. But like, I do think there is something to the idea that like maybe it's a little bit more utilitarian, a little bit uglier. But is that worth the trade-off? I would say definitively yes. But it's interesting that like that a company that seemed to be obsessed with appearance for a long time, not that they're not obsessed with appearance still, but just that they've backed off the accelerator just slightly to allow for utility, and I think that's really interesting, and I quite frankly hope to see more of that.
One of the visual things that is striking to me, at least going over the images right now, is the notch, not the notch that we're envisioning, but the one where you like put your finger in and lift the lid. That's
it looks
back.
sharp.
Yeah, that was sharp in the previous models.
So for those who don't know, the very first one was quite literally sharp enough to draw blood.
Yep.
And they had to quite literally file it down and make those chamfered edges a little more rounded because it was very sharp. So I definitely felt the same thing looking at it, Fernando, that it looks a lot sharper like the older ones used to be. But maybe it's just larger to get your thumb under, like, in there because it is this heavier thing that you're now lifting, right?
But I don't have my M1 here, my laptop, but it doesn't have one, right?
It just has a cutout.
A
for
cutout.
the MacBook Air.
It's
Because
different.
The laptop is heavy enough for you to like lift it.
So the Air, or at least the Air, right, has the cutout in it is actually goes the full height of that edge of the bottom. So it's just like you said, it's just literally a cutout. So that means that the screen is taller, and if I go like this, right, the screen is taller than the cutout, so it gives you a place to kind of push against. And then when you look at it, it's like literally, on the edge, right? It's literally a cutout.
So then it's nothing new, is it?
It is a bit newer than the last revision of laptops, because on the last revision of laptops, there's just no front to it that it almost looked like it reached the bottom.
Right.
Whereas because the newer laptop now has quite a lot of thickness to it.
It's like a bowl, right? Like it's like a
Yep.
sort of a bowl pushed into the side of the laptop.
So
and I think it is deeper probably to be able to lift that larger screen now.
Right.
Yep. So definitely going back to your point, Ben, I think this evokes a little bit of nostalgia because we've been on the one single line design for so long.
Yeah.
If you could trace a Mac with one line, it's an IVE design. And here it feels like a computer. Like the previous versions kind of felt like I don't want to stretch it too much, but like a piece of art, like an ode to the Mac. And this just feels like the spiritual successor to like the 2013 aluminum version. So I'm extremely, extremely happy to see this. It's really, really cool.
And it's not, I wouldn't say that it's ugly. Like, I should be clear that I don't think that it's an ugly computer. But it does, I don't know, like I'm looking at right now, and
it's a different set of design decisions.
Yeah, the shot that I'm seeing is like head on, and it's the full height of it, so I can see its feet, I can see the sort of front of it, I can see the screen, and it's very flat. It's very the little feet are cool, and they're like extruded down the bottom of the aluminum, and have the little. I'm sure they have like little rubber pads on them and stuff. Very cool. I fear that they're going to fall off, like previous laptops that I've owned have done, but like it's just, I don't know. Like I think what you're saying, Dimitri or Fernando, I think it's like it felt like kind of a piece of art a little bit.
Yeah.
And now it feels more like
a computer.
Like a computer, which like I'm both excited by and like just ever so slightly disappointed by, only because that was a thing that kind of made Apple laptops kind of unique in the space. And now it feels like maybe this is it's slightly more like what everybody else does, 1% in the direction towards that way. I mean, obviously, when we get into all the internals, it's like ridiculous, right? Yeah. It's amazing. But like just if you just looked at it if you took the Apple logo itself off of it, right, and you looked at it, would you, like, I feel like the previous ones were a little bit more iconic, and even without the logo, you'd be like, that's a MacBook Pro, right? Whereas this, I don't know. Maybe I'm being overly harsh.
I disagree.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because it's like it just feels like if MagSafe is Apple at its best.
Yeah.
The old MacBooks with the Touch Bar were Apple at its worst. Yeah. Just trying to be too. You're just trying too hard. Yeah. Trying too hard to make it pretty. Trying too hard to make it nice. Trying too hard to make this, like, some things happen that aren't going to happen. Like, for instance, I know nothing about like the internal design team at Apple, but I could certainly see an overzealous designer being like, no, we don't need the tiny feet to protrude, right? We don't want that. It doesn't look good. But it's just, maybe it's necessary for the engineering in this case because it like helps with the airflow, right?
Right.
So I
airflow?
think
There's no fans that don't run most of the time.
What? There's
the fans. They don't
have
fans.
Don't
need to run. Yeah, they have fans, but they said they don't even run if you don't need them.
True.
But if you do need them.
And it also said that they move 50% more air with less noise than the previous ones. So.
But I guess that's sort of my point. Like, Apple at its best is like, let's not make an engineering decision just because it's pretty. Let's make the decision and make it pretty. Like, the intersection. And it felt like the previous generation was like, No. The feet are fine. Like let's just trim them down. But
Yeah.
the airflow, no, that's fine. We don't need.
Well, I think that there's the perfect example of that is when, I don't remember her name, but the woman that was kind of showing off the specs initially. I was really interested to kind of hear her rattle off like the big things, because she's going to have to talk about the HDMI port and the SD card slot and the lack of a touch bar and all that, right? And she just sailed right through it in typical Apple fashion. And I don't remember the words, but when she talked about the fact that the touch bar wasn't there anymore, and she really just said like, you know, we have these beautiful media keys that are really easy to press, familiar, easy to press, blah, 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 blah. Very tactile, right? Because they're real. They're physical buttons and not a screen. And she made like some passing mention of the touch bar, right? Which I thought was interesting. But it was like very typical of them to be like, yeah, this thing that we said for years was this unique, amazing value prop that nobody else was doing. It sucked and nobody really wanted. I mean, I didn't actually hate it when I had one, but I didn't find it to be all that
It wasn't useful.
amazing.
I think it could have been iterated on, and the fact that
Agreed.
they never iterated on
They didn't,
is where it fell apart. Like if the
Right.
function row keys stayed in between, no one would have
Yeah.
had issues accidentally touching it.
Right.
If they eventually added haptic feedback, then that would have
Right.
made it better over time. So I think it's
Yeah.
a shame that Apple never like decided to iterate on it at all. Maybe they
Right.
like read into the hate that surrounded it from like the very first iteration and just gave up on it from that point forward
Yeah.
and said, well, we have the machine that's going to cut the hole anyway, so we're just going to keep using it.
Right.
Like I don't know where that decision came.
We're making those tiny chips to run the screen. Good enough, right? We'll just keep doing it. Yeah.
I will give Apple the benefit of the doubt that they really tried to make it work internally. Like that's where it's
Yeah.
the benefit of the doubt.
I mean, at what point though? When it came out, because they didn't add anything to it.
No, not well. You're right.
They did show off. So
You're
like they got Algorithm on stage and they had like that DJ Pro update where you could do DJing from your touch bar. Again, it's like they're trying really hard to make this
I
a
remember
thing,
that
and it's
demo.
just not a
Yeah.
thing, right? But basically, that's my point. Is that you know, Apple at its best is when they do recognize that the things maybe that they were doing aren't working, and they actually change. They're willing to sort of change gears and go a different route. They're never going to come out and be like, "Sorry guys, we screwed this up." They're never going to do that because they're way too proud for that, right? But who cares, right? All that actually matters is that they change it, and they've done and they've changed it, and so we're in a better place than we were, I think. But I totally get what you're saying, Fernando, and I think that is the essence of the thing that I was trying to say, which is like they're at their best. It's when engineering and design intersect, and that they recognize that they need to intersect in order for it to be good.
Yes.
And like going down a route that is too engineering-y, right? Too just like building tech for tech's sake is not good. And also going down the route of like, this is really pretty, but it also kind of sucks as a computer because it can't breathe, right? Because it doesn't have feet, right? Or whatever, like whatever the thing might be, is also bad. So like it really needs to be that intersection of engineering and design. And I think I feel like we did
Back.
see that today. Yeah, we
Yes.
saw that today, which is really cool.
That said, I don't think like I see where both of you are coming from, but I don't think that the previous iteration of laptops came from a design driven like focus. I really do think that Apple believed that USB-C and Thunderbolt would be the future because if you think of it from a technological standpoint, it is amazing. It's for once in all of technology, we have a single cable that can do it all. And they doubled down on it, and they really tried to make that into an only option. And the fact that they got rid of all the other ports forced people to kind of move towards USB-C. We would not have USB-C on anything if Apple didn't force all their laptops, and therefore all their users that have laptops to start using USB-C type of cables and things like that. It just wouldn't be there. Everyone would still be on micro USB.
Right.
So I really do think that
Yikes.
Apple was moving from the point of view of a technology standpoint, like really trying to push this as the single future for where technology should go in terms of like a single port to rule them all. And this, in a way, is them admitting that it failed. Like they partially succeeded. Like USB-C is now everywhere, which is now a good thing, but there's still a whole lot of non-USB-C stuff that is still everywhere. And that's a reality.
Well, and it's also not their fault that USB-C / Thunderbolt, like in general, as a group of technologies, it's not their fault that it's an absolute hot mess of just like truly psychotic thinking. I don't know, like the USB IF, is that the name of the body that manages it? I might be getting that wrong, but basically this like regulatory body internationally that manages the spec, right? They recently came out with new labeling that's supposed to fix everything, and it's like,
right.
yeah, it's
Horrible.
like the USB-C. It says like USB, and then it says like 20
Charging.
GB, and then there's like a lightning bolt for fast charging. And it's like nobody is going to read or understand any of these weird symbols. You are not helping. And the fact that there's like 16 different specs, and there are some cables that work with some and not with others, and it's like the fact actually I think that they all have the same connector is really, while it's a blessing and a curse, right? It's great because it's interoperability all day long. The downside is that for I would say not even just for regular lay people, I would say literally for everyone, including super nerds, right? It's just too hard to understand which cable goes with which port and how fast the speed you're going to get and whether it supports X or Y or Z. Because they all use the same port, you're like, I don't know, does this work? It plugs in. It doesn't actually seem to be working, but it does plug in. And I think that's part of its problem. And certainly that is not, I mean, I think Apple's part of that group or could influence it or whatever. So, they're part of the thing.
They influence it in that the only ports on Macs are the best ports.
Right.
Like there's no there's no crappier USB-C port on most Macs. On some iPads and stuff where Thunderbolt controllers are not there, like that one's a USB port. And they point it out when they do. But on all the Macs, it's all Thunderbolt ports. And
but it's not their fault, right? That whole mess is not their fault.
They tried.
They tried. Yeah, exactly.
I kept thinking a lot about what you said, Dimitri, and I think you're right. I think I agree that Apple did do it because they were like trying to push forward. I just really resent them. My M1, I hate my M1. I hate it. I had to buy like a dongle to use it, and then a Thunderbolt dock, and then everything. And you're right. Like once all of that is set up, it's actually amazing that I could just plug one cable in.
You have one cable to plug in.
Yeah. It's really, really useful and nice. I just hated them for that for a long time. But I agree. I think it's definitely for the best.
And what's funny is they didn't really add that much. Like they added HDMI, which I would say is almost a little too late. Like at this point, I'm not even probably wouldn't even use that port that much.
And it's useful at the a hotel.
Yeah, that's true.
TV.
That's true.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's like the one use that a regular person will probably have.
Right, because that
plugging into their TV.
Yeah, the hotel TV is not going to have Thunderbolt support. It's going to be HDMI for sure.
If you're in an office and you want to present something, like you don't want to get off your desk with a dongle.
Right.
You just want to put your laptop down and just.
Well, I haven't had a meetup in a while because of the pandemic, but I was running an in-person meetup for a long time, and we always had to make sure that like us organizers had a couple different dongles, right? Because when we had guest speakers come and speak, they'd be like, because what does the projector have and what did the person have, and like it's like, oh, what combination of dongles do we need to create to like make this connection?
An Apple TV to it. That is the best thing I've ever done when traveling. Is just bring an Apple TV with me.
Well, that's what we ended up doing eventually. But for a little while, we had this whole dongle dance, and it was not fun.
Frustrating.
But then SD, right, which everyone complains about. I would imagine that probably only 5% of people actually would use that because it's mostly like a video photo thing. And then MagSafe, which genuinely super fan of. Like no problem with that at all. But honestly, like they didn't really add that much extra connectivity to this new laptop, and yet I saw nothing but and a better headphone port. Universal praise. Like in my Twitter feed today, it was just like people were just fawning all over themselves to praise Apple for bringing all the ports back. And it's like, well, okay, they brought HDMI and they brought SD and they put a better headphone jack in it and they gave us MagSafe. I guess that's all that we wanted. I agree with you, Dimitri, that it is frustrating that Apple tried a thing that kind of the industry didn't really keep up with, but at the same time, I do find it a little bit funny that the HDMI port and the XD or the SD card slot is like, all right, cool, Apple's back at 100% again. Sure.
I do have an excellent use for a USB-C to USB-A dongle.
Okay.
If you do have one and you do have an iMac, keep it plugged in all the time because now you have a free USB-A port you can always reach without ever going behind that computer.
It's true.
So
It's
the
good.
best addition to any iMac you can ever get. So joking aside, we are seeing one less Thunderbolt 4 port compared to the previous Pro MacBook Pros. And I am slightly saddened by it because I had once hit the point where I used all the ports. But I guess it's fine.
Were you
in
using
today's
one of those
day and
ports for
age.
charging, or
2 for displays, 1 for hard drive, and then the last one for my phone.
Okay.
Which was
because
connected to
it is
Xcode.
3, but because you don't have to use those for charging because you have the MagSafe port, right? Like you do actually have the ability to use all 3 for non-charging purposes, which I would imagine a lot of people probably used at least one for charging. But it sounds like in your case you really were using all of them for peripheral.
Actually, so we're going to come back to this, but I did order one, and I plan to use 3 monitors with it. So I am going to have no I/O on those 3 monitors. Now I'm realizing. I guess I have some old slow USB-C on the back of one of the monitors, but yeah,
doesn't the LG have pass through?
shitty pass-through.
Is it?
Or aren't you going to plug your XDR into it? Does it have?
Yeah, I'll rely on that one, but
But I mean,
yeah,
so
not
that one
the-
has actual I/O on the back, right? Like additional, yeah.
yeah, but it's still USB-C.
Okay,
So.
got it.
Yeah,
Aren't
if you
all-
plan
What
on
a
using
terrible
other
life for
Thunderbolt stuff-
Dimitri.
I know.
He does.
terrible. But if you do use Thunderbolt stuff, they tend to have a chaining where
Right.
the monitor can always be last. So
Right.
that's always a benefit. So that is all the ports and the case. And let's move on to the screen. So at the top of the screen, we have new cameras, or new camera, singular. And that is a 1080p camera. Yay!
Yay.
It only took
it has a notch.
15 years.
Is that the one that's in
Well-
the new iMac? Do we know?
Maybe, maybe not.
Okay.
But the benefit is, or the reason this was possible is because the screen suddenly got thicker. And the screen suddenly got thicker because we have a brand new display which has HDR capabilities thanks to the iPad Pro that came right
Neat.
before it.
Yeah, so you get local dimming with these. Are they mini LEDs? Is that what they called it? Mini LED
Yep, mini
technology?
LEDs.
So you get.
I counted the zones on one of the pictures. It's 2,496
Of
zones.
course you
so
did.
Decent. 64 by 39.
Okay, well that's See, there you go. So 3024 by 1964 on the 14-inch, and 3456 by 2234 on the 16-inch, which puts you in. If you cut those in half to create a 2x resolution, you end up with a usable sort of screen area that is a little bit bigger than the ones that it replaces. 254 ppi. So
What does 1600 peak mean?
So that means that it can hit 1,600 nits. So a nit is a weird type of way of
Yep.
measuring light,
Yep.
how many candles you can put or something.
Yeah,
Or that might be a candela. I don't know. But 1,600 is the peak brightness. So basically, with an HDR screen, you can light up the whole screen bright white, but it gets very hot. So what you can do here is you have 1,000 nits for the whole screen. But if you want to make part of the screen even brighter, you can. You just can't sustain it. So it's going to be bright
makes
for
sense.
10 seconds, and then it's going to start to dim back to that 1,000 because it's too much energy and too much heat that's going into
Makes sense.
creating that much light.
cool.
So that's
And
what
I
that
think
peak thing
that's
is.
that those numbers, 1,000 sustained, 1,600 peak, those are the same numbers on the M1 iPad Pro, right?
Yep, same as on the M1 iPad Pro, same on the iPhones, I believe.
Interesting.
And same on the Pro Display XDR. That said, the bigger the screen, the more light you're producing per inch.
Right.
So there's a lot more heat coming out of the Pro Display XDR regarding just because it's that much bigger.
Right.
So it requires way more energy there. But that's the standard that they're holding themselves to.
Very cool. And then ProMotion for the first time, I think, ever on an Apple
Yeah,
laptop.
I didn't see this coming.
Very cool. So up to 120 hertz maximum refresh rate, and then but it's variable, so it will go down to, I think they said 24 was the lowest refresh rate that the screen would offer, and then jump.
I think it will ramp down to 10.
It will go to 10?
Just
Okay.
like the iPhone.
Okay.
Very low.
But you can configure it to 24.
Got it. Okay, yeah, because I think I saw in the tech specs that you can just peg it at a certain refresh rate, and there was like 4 or 5 to choose from.
Yeah,
but
which the old 16-inch could do.
okay.
Oh, cool.
But what's really cool about this is that with the variable refresh rate, the system can automatically figure out what refresh rate is sort of best for the content that you're consuming, and hopefully that should lead to really great battery life, because one of the biggest things that drives a battery down on a device that has a screen is the screen itself. I've noticed that for sure on my iPhone 13 Pro compared to my iPhone 12. Obviously, the battery is literally bigger in my new phone, and it's also a year newer, so that helps. But it seems like even with those two things in play, I feel like my battery is doing better throughout the day than it would have with a sort of a comparable iPhone 12 with the same sort of aged battery. And I would suspect that is in no small part due to the ProMotion display being able to change its refresh rate. So really, like you said, Dimitri, I think surprising that they were able to bring that to the computer, and very cool that'll be yet one more thing. Something that I definitely need. I did not buy one yet anyway, but something that I noticed is that after getting ProMotion on my phone, I was like, this is amazing. I don't think I can go back, and so I feel like I probably should not go into an Apple store anytime soon and play with the new Pro, because if I do that, it's very likely that ProMotion is going to ruin me, and then I will have to get a new one. So I got to stay away.
Well, if you're going to be using it with an external display, then there's no point getting too excited. That's said, true. Macs do support ActiveSync on Monterey, I think 10.12. No, 12. macOS 12.
Right.
Still not used to that. So if you do have a fancy gaming monitor that has ActiveSync, it will go ahead and use that if you have a compatible GPU. So it's not new to the Mac to have something that's higher than 60. Like, you could always do it if the GPU could do it.
Yep.
But having something that can ramp up and down is like built in. I really think was down to Apple having their own silicon in the machine, because they were previously being limited by the GPU and the CPU processor.
Right.
So if that could not deal with the amount of pixels, which Apple tends to put a lot of pixels in their displays, it's not a 1080 screen like many gaming laptops are. That is probably the limiting factor that held them back, or at least in a way that they felt comfortable bringing it to their displays. And I was very surprised by this, honestly.
Right.
You could always, to interject a little bit there, you could always get a 144 FPS 4K monitor if you really want to.
Yeah. But it wouldn't go up and down
that makes sense.
Refresh rate. That is new with Monterey for any Mac. But new on these is the internal display being able to do it.
Cool.
So it's not using a dedicated GPU.
Yep.
Right. Very cool.
So then that brings us to the disk, which is way faster. So the 8 terabyte model can hit 7.4 gigabytes per second, which is a ludicrous speed as far as I'm concerned.
Is that typically read or write speed? I don't pay attention to this
read
stuff.
and write.
It's both. Okay.
Oh,
cool.
wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Random.
And so the smaller disks are not quite as fast? Is that...
Yes, because basically an 8 terabyte disk is 2 4 terabyte disks rated. And the the disk controller will go ahead and rate them.
Nice.
And that's why it can hit those speeds. And that's typically what's done nowadays. You have many chips and they're all kind of rated together.
Right.
So you're not actually storing multiple, one file will typically span multiple chips.
Right.
Just to kind of get the best performance possible.
Right.
So the smaller your SSD, the slower it will be. So it's only the 8 terabyte that can hit that speed. But yeah.
Cool.
And then the speakers are better.
Yeah.
That's nice.
So there's 2 tweeters and 4 woofers, I think. One set of woofers that are pointed up towards you, and 2 that are pointed down towards the towards the surface that you've rested your laptop on, I guess. And then they talked about all kinds of stuff like software that they're engaging with to make it so that the speakers all work in concert, and it has an improved 3 mic array that it also uses to figure out how to, like, I think maybe it's doing some HomePod stuff to, like, make sure that the sound is as good as possible. I didn't really listen that hard to that part because they're still laptop speakers. Like,
no, it's interesting. I was going to say I had to clean up Sylvia's old laptop, which is a maxed out MacBook Pro from 2013, and I was like, wow, this is actually pretty usable. Until I played a YouTube video, and I was like shocked by the quality of the speakers. It's like, wow, they've come a long way. So they're certainly better and not the highlight, but they're like the work they're putting in audio is incredible.
Yeah.
And one benefit of having a larger chassis for the monitor for the laptop is you have more room for all those speakers to actually have bigger diaphragms and stuff, which they pointed out. So yeah,
volume is useful. Like, you can fill it with stuff, useful stuff.
Yeah, especially more volume.
Especially more volume. Yeah.
I especially liked that diagram. Not really diagram, but that representation of the woman listening to her laptop, and it was showing the sound coming from behind her. So this is an exquisitely powerful speaker that just teleports behind you and gets that sound coming from every direction.
That's right. Nice.
Yeah, so there's no Face ID despite there being a notch. There is... I don't know what else to say.
And everyone's kind of freaking out about the notch. Like, I saw tons and tons of just jokes and backlash and stuff on Twitter. And I was like, really? I don't care. Like, I'm going to be like, oh, that's funny. And then I will probably never notice it again if I were to start using that as a
I look forward to menus not fitting and then appearing on the other side.
Yeah.
There are new APIs.
So I think there was something about the menu bar is taller. Is that what they said? Because okay. So that would probably be more jarring than the presence of the notch itself, because the menu bar has been a certain height for
forever.
I think that would honestly be more of an upset to me than, like, who cares about having a notch? People get so upset about, like, in my opinion, some silly things.
So yeah, I think it's interesting because the notch was something that, like, was where the Apple logo originally was in their very first versions of macOS 10. Like, they had the Apple logo front and center on that menu bar, and when there were too many menu items, it would just kind of go on the other side of it, and it looked a bit wonky.
It was in the middle? Really?
It was in the middle. Yep.
That's so weird.
Hey, on classic macOS, it was on the right.
Okay.
Or not the Apple was on the right, but the functionality of it was on the right.
Right.
In any case, like the dock kind of stuff.
Yeah.
In any case, it's very clear that they showed screenshots of the 16-inch on all the marketing pages, and there were some apps that kind of, like, went right up to there. So if you have a 14-inch, you are going to see menus hanging off the center quite often, I feel like. So just be prepared for that. Maybe that's the reason why Safari got their new tab interface. So when you go full screen into Safari, the tabs kind of avoid the notch along the way.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
So whoever's brave enough to use that option, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Anything else about the MacBook Pros that are notable?
Well, I think we probably should talk about the actual chips just for a quick second. We got two, which, to be honest, when they announced the M1 Pro and they said 32 gig RAM max, I was like, that's an interesting choice. Like, I think it's probably perfectly fine for most people, but I could already feel the collective disappointment in the nerd world about, like, oh, really, not more than that? And then, of course, they follow it right up with a second version, the M1 Max, that does go all the way up to 64 gigs of RAM total. And then also just turns everything else up to 11 as well. 32 core GPU, 10 core CPU, extra encoders and decoders, and all kinds of extra fun stuff. The die is literally larger to fit more things. It's everything that's good about the chips they've made so far, but just more of those things to make it even more powerful, which I think is... the naming convention is kind of weird because it kind of implies that the Max is not Pro, which I think is not what you want.
Pro.
But
I bought an M1 Mac with an M1 Max.
Yeah, and then there's that whole thing. There's that whole weirdness. But all in all, it looks like some ridiculously overpowered systems that are not replacing, but are certainly an improvement over the M1. And the M1 was already kind of like dunking on everybody else anyway. So these are just we've already been lapped, and now they're just starting to like play. They're almost racing in a different race now. Like it's just the amount of horsepower and strength and combined with efficiency is, I feel like, making probably everybody else quake in their boots a little bit about like, oh crap, now we have to deal with this now as a competition.
And Intel just had an interview like a day or two ago.
Oh, really?
Where they said, yeah, we want to still work with Apple, and we'll do that by making better chips than Apple. That was what they said. So
I also think I read that they
keep
said,
it strong, Intel.
There was another phrase which was like, the PC guys aren't just gonna come in and figure this processor thing out. They're just not gonna do it.
Taking a page out of Ed Colligan's book.
It's
good.
I don't want to say it came out of nowhere. If you've been paying attention, they've
Yeah.
been doing chips for like 10 years.
Right.
But like the graphics that they presented today, they were
Those graphs were
else.
something else. Yeah.
And they actually labeled what the
Yes.
PC
Yep.
computer were.
Yes.
And they are notable. They are not the cherry picked models that you could always be better than.
like
they
the most
picked
sold
suitable
laptop or whatever.
examples.
Yeah, like
Yep.
we picked
Yeah.
a $300 off-brand laptop from some Chinese brand you've never heard of, and that has the most generic possible chipset, and we beat it. It's like, well, of course you did. But, I thought that was cool, and it just seemed like Johnny Sergi was just probably every word that was coming out of his mouth was probably just like sweet like candy. Like he was just basically
Yeah.
Can't
showing
contain the
them,
giggles.
yeah, the whole time, like we're faster, we're stronger, we're more power efficient, and in like the one possible case where we don't spank the competition when it comes to performance, like that whatever that was, that really crazy high end laptop that they used, they're
Right.
like, even in that case where they are slightly more powerful than we are at like from a bulk horsepower perspective, we are like, what is it, 100% more energy efficient than they are. Like at
It was a ton.
at like a 10 or 20% drop in performance.
Yep.
And then what was really striking to me was at the end they took the kind of the power curves and they said, okay, let us show you what it looks like when we switch from outlet power to battery power. And the M1s didn't move at all. They stayed exactly where they were. Everybody else got real small. Like every
Yep.
single other graph got like 20% of its original size, including that really powerful one. And it was like, so what you're saying is the only way you can eke out that performance is if you are plugged in, and it's a laptop. Like kind of the whole point is to not have to be plugged in. So yeah, I thought it was a lot of information kind of all at once, but like now that I've had a little time to sort of digest it, it really shows you, like, it's like you just kind of like you said before, Fernando, it's like Apple at their best, right? Like
Yep.
they're just quietly, plainly, in a very straight up way, just showing you like, what else can I say? Like we're the best that we could that
They're
possibly
faster,
could ever be.
more capable,
Yeah.
more power efficient.
Yeah.
Faster, more capable, more power
Yeah,
efficient.
these aren't
Faster,
three
more
things, guys.
capable,
It's
more
just
power
one
efficient.
thing.
The M1.
It's why people hate Apple. Like it
Yeah.
takes a showman
Yes.
or show person to actually surprise you when
Yeah.
you've been seeing the progress all along, right?
Yeah.
We knew this was coming. This
Right.
shouldn't be surprising. We shouldn't be like all gidding and just giggling about like, oh, look at that power graph. Like we shouldn't be, because
Right.
this is no surprise. But it
Right.
is surprising.
Yes.
It is amazing. So I think that's why there are podcasts. That's why there are podcasts about Apple, and everyone loves and hates to talk
Right.
about Apple, because they
Right.
just do things like this sometimes,
Right.
and they're just like, oh wow.
I think the other thing too is like it's not just about like expecting it to happen, but then they really do it. It's not like, because there's lots of people in the world that say things that they're
Yep.
going to do things and that things are going to be a certain way, and then when it really happens, they're like, well, we didn't quite get there, right? And Apple certainly does have examples of that too. I'm not trying to say that they're like infallible, but more often than not, they don't say things in advance, right? We expect things to happen,
Yep.
and usually they come up and they meet our expectations, or they even exceed them. And I feel like in this case, we were, like you said, we were all expecting, even the Pro and Max names kind of leaked a little bit before, like on the weekend before. And it was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Like, whatever, maybe they'll have a couple chips. And then I honestly think that like people probably thought the Max was maybe going to be reserved for like the Mac Pro or something, right? And it's like, no, you can get that in the MacBook Pro, and also like look at these graphs. Like look how insane. Look, and what I really liked was if you watch the like minute and a half long promo video for the MacBook Pro, and you listen carefully to the narration, they're basically leaning into the idea that like we're psychotic. Like we've just gone completely off of,
Super Saiyan.
like, yeah, we're just totally, out in La La Land, and we've created this thing that is like truly a beast. And we're kind of scared of it. Like it's so powerful. We're a little scared of what it is and what you guys are going to do with it. And I think that was a really interesting, even like marketing position for them, because they're not typically that, like, I'm not going to say funny, but like they're not typically that irreverent. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like it felt different to me. Like it felt different, and I thought that was cool.
Guys, it supports more than one display. Like,
yeah,
only Apple would be able to do something like that.
Be careful with that, Fernando. So I looked into this.
He's gonna well actually us.
The M1 Pro can support up to 2 Pro Display XDRs. They did not specify or for 4K displays, which they usually do when like a graphics card can support like multiple different sets of resolutions and stuff. Like in terms of pure pixel quantity, it's 2 displays. The M1 Max, that one can support 4 displays, which they say 3 Pro Display XDRs plus something in the HDMI port. So
I'm very happy I asked for the Max.
Is that all in addition to its onboard display, or
yes?
Okay.
Yes, there's the onboard display, and then there's 2 externals on the Pro, and then 4 externals on the Max.
Got it.
And if you look at the die shots, like it's pretty clear what's going on here. The extra part that comes from the Max is just like a mirror image of the part that comes above it, which is just the GPUs, basically. So they doubled the GPU performance and thus doubled the lanes that were necessary on the bus or whatever you need to actually communicate with the second display. And it seems like it really is tied to the displays and not necessarily the raw graphics power of the GPU, which is something to consider. So if you are getting this computer and you want to run more than the built-in display plus 2, if you want to run 3 or 4, or even 2 on Thunderbolt and then 1 on the HDMI, don't go thinking that you can put 2 less capable displays via DisplayPort and then 1 on the HDMI. That might not work.
There's an old saying in like the hot rod world that like there's no substitution for displacement. That basically the idea that like one way to solve the power problem in a hot rod is to just literally make the engine bigger, like give it more cylinders, right? Make bore them out, make them take in more gas air mixture, right? Just make it more powerful by giving it more of the thing that it uses to make power. And it sounds like in some ways Apple kind of took that thing like, how are we gonna make the M1 chip better? We will just make more M1 chip we will just make more of it, and then it will be better. Like, and that's what they did, and that's what it is. It is better because it is just base. I'm sure that there are lots of improvements to the process, and I'm sure that there's.
Well, it is 5 nanometer, so the M1 was a 7 nanometer process. Yeah. And this one is following in the heels of the A15,
right?
With a 5 nanometer process, so it's probably the same internal cores as the A15, upclocked like the M1 was for the A14.
Right.
So generation-wise, this really is an M2 class.
Right.
If you were to consider like the generations of processors, it's not an extension of the M1. It is a new process.
But rather than eking out more performance from the same inputs, they in addition to making those inputs better, they also just added more, right? So that we can get more, which I think is I mean, it seems like it's working great. So I don't have any complaints about it. It's just, it's interesting that's, and also like, again, in hindsight, if anybody's not paying attention, relatively obvious, like a relatively obvious way to sort of solve this problem. Again, in hindsight. And so I think makes it all the more surprising, like you were saying, Fernando, that people maybe shouldn't be as surprised as they are. And yet I'm sure that this announcement probably caught some of their competitors in like the chip space off guard a little.
Yep.
So very interesting.
And one more thing I want to bring up is they positioned this chip against all other laptop chips. There was no comparison to this running in a desktop. They said from the very beginning, this is a MacBook Pro event, basically from the start of the keynote after the music section. And I think we have a lot to look forward to when it comes time to like a larger iMac, a Mac Pro. They said we're 1 year into a 2-year transition. They extended their 2 years as long as they possibly can to make that statement true. I feel like when they just started this, they were hoping like 2 years from DubDub. Now it's going to be 2 years from November. So we still have a lot to look forward to in terms of how they're going to bring this to even higher end computers. And it seems like they're fully confident that they're going to pull it off. And that's honestly a little scary if you're thinking about like where other computers are, and how fast they are and how much faster the hypothetical computer that, like, even this one, we knew it existed. We knew that this chip existed, the Jade C and the Jade 2C. Like, we knew everything about this, like, prior to this chip being announced. We knew exactly that it would be like just a doubling of the M1, but we're still giddy about it, right? Yeah. There's something about it that is just exciting. It is. And I'm really excited to see where Apple's going to.
Groover, one of the articles that I remember from him from a few years ago was how Apple is like Windows and Intel like together. They're like Apple is the one company, whereas in the early 2000s we had like two behemoths like coexisting in a symbiotic relationship. Like Apple is both of those companies right now. They're way ahead of everyone on the chip, and they control the whole software stack. So I'm kind of like shocked. I think just talking with you guys, I'm shocked that today happened, because where does that put us next year? Which is what you're saying, Dimitri. It's kind of like, it gives me goosebumps to think where we'll be in a year, because they can't keep doing this, can they? Like, they can't just keep. They've been keeping the pace on the iPhones, but can they keep doing it?
Well, they use 30 watts of 170 for a laptop case.
Well, and I think what's funny is, like, to answer your question,
just
Fernando,
add more, like you said, Ben.
Yeah, to answer your question, Fernando, I think next year will be where you think we'll likely be, and yet, right, just play it out, right? If you use the M1 and then you use today's M1 Pro and M1 Max as a trajectory guide, you can more or less map where we're probably going to end up next year with the Mac, if we do a Mac Pro and maybe like a high-end iMac Pro or something, right? And yet, even if you were to prognosticate, and I bet probably even reasonably accurate, like you're going to get, within a horseshoe distance of getting it right? We're still probably going to be like, holy crap, how did they do that, right? Like, I bet you in a year or whenever this happens, right, it's going to be just like this. We're going to be like, well, yeah, this is basically what we thought was going to happen, and yet for some reason they showed us some graphs.
Because we
didn't
think it would be possible.
Yeah, okay.
Possible.
Yeah, it's like, okay, Apple, sure, right,
we can
whatever.
take the linear extrapolation, and we can say, okay, it's going to be exactly 4 of these,
right?
And you're going to know exactly what the performance of that is. But then there's somewhere in the back of your mind that says, well, the rest of the industry is at 1.7 of these, and that's on the high end. Yeah. So yes, it's not the fastest, but like the fact that it has so much headroom available to it is scary. Like, honestly, from an excitement point of view, it's something to look forward to.
I think the what do you call that effect where that psychological effect where wanted something and it doesn't happen, and then you say you didn't want it in the first place. It's very difficult to me to grasp what they've been doing on the iPhone. Like looking back at it, I realize now that I was like, oh wow, they're making the iPhone faster. But when you put it on the Mac, it hits different. I don't know why. It hits so different because the iPhone went from like, this thing can't even like turn
take
on
pictures
within a
that
minute.
well, or
Yeah.
And it caught up, and then it surpassed.
Right.
And then, we're at a point where the iPhone is way faster than most machines in the world. Like, literally.
Right.
And then you put that on a Mac, and then to me, it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Where are we? How did we get here? And they're like, you've been asleep at the wheel for 10 years.
Well, and I think in part it's because we got so used to that Intel tick-tock
Yes.
of just like that slow, steady, incremental.
Tick, 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 tick.
Yeah,
tick,
I mean,
tick, tick,
I
tick.
didn't mean TikTok in the sense that I just mean like that sort of like regular pacing, maybe more like a metronome, like just, you know, regular plodding. We're making improvements over time, right? It's getting a little better every time. I mean, when was the last time that you bought an Intel laptop, let's say, because it had a massive improvement in CPU or GPU performance?
Probably like 2001.
Yeah, I mean, you buy a new laptop because you need a new laptop. You're like, this one's getting old. It's getting kind of tired. Battery's going out, and I want to replace it. I'm going to buy, and the new MacBook Pros just came out. I'll buy it, and you're like, oh, cool. It has a 4-core whatever. Like, I mean, you know, it doesn't really matter that much, right?
Yep.
Because it just like you can just rely on the fact, like a train, that it's going to like just continuously, gradually get a little better every year, or sometimes not, depending on what era we're talking about of Intel. And then you come here and you're like, oh, so you're telling me that I can go from this thing that I thought was amazing, but actually is a pile of dog poop, to this new thing that is like obscenely orders of magnitude faster and more power efficient than the thing that I have, and the thing that I just bought recently that was in theory top of the line. Like, I think that insane jump in performance is just not something that, as consumers of these PCs, this hardware, that we've ever really experienced from generation to generation. I think that's probably part of that like neck snapping, holy crap, how did we get here kind of feeling, because it's just not what we expect, right? And yet they're doing it anyway. Like, even though we don't expect it or even think that it's possible, they're doing it anyway, which is, I think, makes it it's like a magic trick. You're just like, that's not, how did you do that? Like, that's not, I watched you do all of that, and it didn't look like that was going to work, but it totally did, right?
Nerd
like
magic.
That. Yeah, like that. I don't know if you
it.
guys have seen, but that, I've just seen clips of it, I think on TikTok, but I think it's the America's Got Talent show with this woman who's a quick change artist. And like, I think she might be on like the most recent season or something of that show. And so I've seen clips of her on stage on this show doing it. And she's changing her clothes, you know, from one outfit to another, like literally in front of you with no screen. Like, you know, what I would assume, if you asked me to describe a quick change artist, I'd be like, oh, they put a sheet in front of themselves, and then a couple seconds later they come out of the sheet and they're wearing different clothes. No, she's like changing what she's wearing without anything in front of her. Like, you can watch it flip from one to the other, and it's kind of like, that is not, how is that possible? And yet I just saw it happen, right? Like, I think that is part of what's going on here. It's like, we're just not expecting it, and yet it's happening.
I think this happened for me twice before the M1 transition. One I remember clearly is switching to SSDs. Like, this was a clear like superpower your computing experience, just because it, like, the boot time. Yes. The boot time used to be minutes.
Yes.
And it went from minutes to something that was rather instantaneous by comparison. And the second one was the ability to play like high resolution video files. If you did not have an H.264 decoder like built into your hardware, you could not play back video files. It was just not something that was possible. You had to have a different codec that would like work on your computer. And a newer computer enabled that functionality. The chip didn't get faster.
Right.
It's just you got an extra piece of functionality. And that's something that like you glossed over it when you introduced these, but we are getting a bit of that in these chips. Like, for the first time, we're getting ProRes encoders and decoders. That has been software this whole time. And Apple basically flexed by saying, hey, if you have 30 streams of 4K, just like 30 cameras, and you want to make a collage of video, that's going to be real time now.
Right.
And that is faster than the Mac Pro with 28 cores and the Afterburner card within it, which was a dedicated chip just for ProRes. I think it really shows that they're using everything that they're learning, building out all sorts of things, from the watch to get the display rates that go down. Like the iPad was just from 60 to 120. That was it. Whereas on the watch, it was like from 60 to 1. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when they brought it to the phone and now the Mac, it goes from 10 to 120. Like that is the new range that is possible. And we're seeing the same thing with the Afterburner card. Like that FPGA, they soldered all those connections that were variable up until that point, and they basically brought it over to this chip, and they doubled it with the Mac. So you have even more streams that are available to you that you can then go ahead and use. And I think that there are all sorts of little things like this that are on their chips that make them faster for the uses that you use it for. That's why we're always saying, hey, Apple, make like a Zib unpacking faster. Like, you have the power to do this. Right. Just dedicate a little part of your chip, and every developer will be very happy.
Man, if they announced today that there was an Xcode unzipping core on the M1,
the instruction is just Xcode unzip.
Yes, people would have lost it. That would have
That's the assembly.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Cool.
Lots to be excited about.
Yes.
So thank you so much to Ben, who is at Ferrous Guy. That's FERROUSGUY on Twitter. And Fernando, who is at From Junior to Senior. That's FROMJRTOSR on Twitter, for joining me today. My name, once again, is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Buñuel. That's DIMITRIBOUNIOL. And we'll see you all soon.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
So I recently watched a TikTok where somebody booted up, like, it was like a 200 megahertz ish like PC tower from the mid 90s, and they just put it, they put the camera in front of the monitor and the computer, and they pushed the button and they started it up, and it, for one thing, it took like 3 minutes to boot into Windows, and then number two, all of the sounds that the computer tower made, I suddenly remembered as like
they're beautiful.
It's like visceral memories.
Yes, like I was like, oh yeah, the computer used to sound like it like clonks.
It had sounds.
Like clonks and makes weird like thud noises and and jitter and all this mechanical noise was coming out of the computer, and like even to the point of like talking about like the Energy Star rating on the monitor and this like crap in the pre-boot sequence that it was showing you, and I was like, right, it used to like show you all the stuff that it was doing and also make all these weird noises, and like I just was immediately transported back to being like 10 or 11 in my family's living room, which is where the computer was, like booting it up and then like going in and like they didn't do this part, but like connecting the modem and getting on the internet and like all that stuff, and it was just like, oh man, it was like so like nostalgic to watch and listen to it, and at the same time like very happy that.
Why did they include speakers on modems?
Yeah, I don't.
Legitimate question.
Because
like,
it's
who's
just
gonna
noise.
Listen to this and determine if this is a good connection or
right,
bad.
it's literally just noise, and it's obnoxious. Like it's like screeching and then noises, and like it's not good. Like they're not pleasant sounds. Yeah. So, but I just thought it was really like it was a thing that was buried in my brain, and once the person pushed the button and I heard all these like clonking noises, and when I was like, oh yeah. Those were the days. Like I would
gather around, children. We're gonna watch the computer boot up now.
Definitely not want to go back to those days. But interesting to remember.
It's so cool. When you said, we were running low on time, but when you said the SSD story, Dimitri, I vividly remember my first SSD. It was like a super expensive 80 gigabyte Intel SSD. Yeah. And the moment I plugged in, I was like, I'm never ever having another computer without an SSD. Yeah, it was magical.
Yeah, and so for today, Federici mentioned it. He said instant on. So I'm assuming that means that all this stuff kind of working together, the computer's going to be able to. Was that?
I don't think the boot. I think it's when you open and close it from sleep.
Okay. But I mean, like my M1
Because from boot, like
Air is already
it's not,
pretty much instant. Like I don't think I have to wait.
No,
Yeah, I mean it's pretty much instant as well. So
they were
is that
rehashing a few things.
so that wasn't an improvement. They were just saying that
Yeah,
this
okay.
one has it too.
Got it.
Like it's a
Okay.
pro laptop with that.
Got it. Okay.